you, we worship and adore you. Glorify thy name in all the earth. Glorify thy name. Glorify thy name. Glorify thy name in all the earth. Jesus, we love you, we worship and adore you. Glorify thy name in all the earth. Glorify thy name. Glorify thy name. Glorify thy name in all the earth. Spirit, we love you, we worship and adore you. Glorify thy name in all the earth. Glorify thy name. Glorify thy name. Glorify thy name in all the earth. Okay, kids, you can head on downstairs. This morning, if you want to follow along, you can turn first of all to Psalm 139. Psalm 139. We've been looking at omnipresence. We've been also looking at the attributes of God for a few weeks, and last week we started on another of the attributes of God, omnipresence. And we asked two questions. What is omnipresence? What's it mean to be omnipresent everywhere? The quality or state of being omnipresent. Of course, you can't define a word using the word, so you have to stretch your definitions. And so omnipresent means present in all places at all times. And then we asked the question last week, who is omnipresent? And we gave you two verses to form a bit of a foundation for understanding the doctrine of omnipresence, the attribute of God in the Bible. We gave you 1 Kings 8:27. The setting for that particular verse is the dedication of the temple by Solomon. And it's part of his prayer. You can go there and read it at your leisure. But simply, the statement was this: but will God indeed dwell on the earth? It's a rhetorical question. It means, can you confine God to a place, the temple? Behold, heaven and the highest heaven cannot contain you, how much less this house that I have built. That's Solomon speaking in his prayer. So in that statement, Solomon addresses the issue of the omnipresence of God. The temple becomes the symbol of God's presence, but Solomon admits in his prayer that there's no place nor no thing that can contain God. In a different setting, and for a different reason, in Jeremiah 23, I gave you another verse, 23 and verse 24, the last part of it. But if you read Jeremiah 23, 23, and 24, you discover Jeremiah, who is the reluctant but obedient prophet of God from the womb of his mother, to an audience that he's been told doesn't care to listen to you and won't listen to you, but keep giving them my message. Jeremiah has these words from God. He simply says, "Do I not fill heaven and earth, declares the Lord." That statement Jeremiah gives tells an unbelieving, rebellious group of people who have made a covenant with the God who is omnipresent that there's no place to hide, because verse 23 gives the question. Do you honestly believe, rebellious people, you can hide from me? And in that statement that Jeremiah gives, he gives a wayward, sinful, rebellious people a statement about the omnipresence of God. There's no place to hide. You can't hide from me. And so in that statement, Jeremiah gives us a view of God that he is both transcendent. He fills the heavens. The understanding of heavens is everything out there beyond the earth. Wherever you would go out there, there God would be. He fills the heavens. He's transcendent. He's so far beyond us that no matter where you went, he's already there. Then he also says, do I not fill heaven and earth? Not only is he transcendent, but he's immanent. I-M-M-A-N-A-N-T, meaning near. To a rebellious nation, to a group of people who did not care about God, did not care to hear about God, had gone their own way to do their own thing, that did not deny nor negate the omnipresence of God. So those are the two questions we asked last week, and that gives you a bit of understanding of where we are as we pick up again this morning, God's omnipresence. He's everywhere. And so I just give you again the definition of omnipresent, present in all places at all times. Now I want to give you a distinction to remember. To do that, I have to move you from Psalm 139 over to the book in the New Testament of Colossians. And Paul writes the letter to the Colossians, which is a region in the area of Turkey, what's known as Turkey today. And he has written a letter to a group of believers there. It's a pass-around letter. It's a letter written to a specific church in a specific area, but other churches in the same area also had letters written to them, and they would pass them around. They would copy the letter, then they would pass around copies to the other churches, so they all got the same communication. But in Colossians, Paul writes to those people, and he writes some interesting statements about God. Now, just to give you a little background on this distinction to remember, Paul's writing as an Orthodox Jew in his early years. He's trained to be Orthodox in his thinking about God. He's trained in the Torah. He's trained as a Pharisee, meaning he's a religious conservative, whatever that means. What it means is that he believes that all of the Torah, the Old Testament, and the Tanakh are inspired by God. You see, the other side of the Jewish religious leaders, the Sadducees, only believed the first 5 books, the Pentateuch, were inspired of God, and only those were necessary to follow. So you have a dichotomy in the religious atmosphere of Israel. Paul's trained as a Pharisee. He's trained rabbinically. He sits at the feet of Gamaliel, one of the first century AD's greatest experts in the Jewish faith. Paul is so zealous to honor his faith in his God that this new group of people that comes into being in the book of Acts, he begins to persecute and seek orders to travel outside of Jerusalem to bring them back and have them murdered. And if you read the book of Acts, you discover that this man of great faith comes to realize his ladder of faith is leaning on the wrong wall. And he comes to faith in the God that he thinks he knows. And he comes to faith in the very person that he has witnessed die on the cross for his sin, Jesus Christ. He writes now as a follower of Jesus Christ, the Messiah, the Anointed One, his words in other letters. He writes to the Colossians, who are a mixture of both Jew and Gentile people, ethnically speaking. And he writes because there's a problem circulating in the church. And the problem is this: there is a popular philosophy running around the area that simply says that God and Jesus Christ are not the same. And that's the crux of the argument of the book of Colossians. He's simply writing to prove that Jesus Christ is God. So what does that mean about God being omnipresent? We'll seek to answer that as we read along. I want to start reading in verse 13 of Colossians chapter 1. I want you to notice you're introduced in mid-thought here because you don't know who the he is in verse 13. The he is explained in the previous context. For sake of brevity of time and observation, I will identify him for you. It's Jesus Christ. Okay? The first he in verse 13, Colossians 1, is Jesus Christ. For he rescued us from the domain of darkness, the authority of darkness, and transferred us. Notice the change in placement. There's action there. You were once here, now you are there. How did I get there? From this he. What did this he do? He rescued you. He brought you from a place, darkness, to another place, light, to the kingdom of his beloved Son. Who's that he? It's God the Father. And this he in the first part of verse 13 is his beloved Son. Verse 14. Notice what this Son did that the Father loves. In whom we have redemption. Not only were we moved at great cost. Redemption, lutrao, to buy and take out of. It's a word used in the slave market of the day. It is a picture of a person going in and buying a slave and then taking them out of the marketplace. And lutrao carries also with it the word of removing the earring in the ear of slaves and giving them freedom. So that tells you something about the kingdom they were in and the kingdom they're now in. Doesn't it? We have redemption. And notice the third person plural there. He identifies himself with these believers. We have redemption. Not only that, redemption brings us something we desperately want and we all need, and we all know it. Forgiveness of sins. Now then, verse 15, he begins a thought. He. Again, you have to identify the he. The he is this beloved Son. He is the image. The word is icon. We get our word icon for that word image. You know what Chevrolet puts on the front of their vehicles? And Ford puts that badge on the front of theirs. Icons. And if you buy an Apple phone, you have an icon of an apple with a bite out of it. What's Paul saying? He's answering the argument that Jesus Christ is not God. He is the icon, the exact representation. If any of you have ever done any leather working with leather and making a design in leather, you know with your mallet and your stylus, the design you want to drive into the leather, you take that stylus and you take that mallet and you whack it and whack it and whack it until what's on the tip of that stylus is placed into the leather. That's exactly what the word icon means here. He is the image of the invisible God. There's an attribute of God the Father we've not talked about. But he's the exact representation of that invisible God. Everything that invisible God is, he is. The firstborn of all creation. We'll get to that in a second. For by him, dia, the preposition is dia. It means through. When you do your mathematical study and you run to fill a grain bin with grain, you want to know the diameter and the height so you know how much grain you can put in that cylinder, that grain bin. The word by means through. It gives agency. For by him all things. How many things? All things. All things were created in the heavens and in the earth. Where? Beyond the expanses we cannot see, and including the material world we can see. Then he goes on to elaborate the creation even more. That which we can visibly see, that which we cannot visibly see. Visible and invisible. Whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities. The structure of order in God's creation was made by him. By him who? By the beloved Son. All things have been created through him and for him. Now it's dia and then for, eist, unto him, to him. Now then, verse 17. He is before all things, existence, and in him all things hold together, perseverance. Everything that there is endures because of this beloved person. He is also, and he goes on to explain this in verse 18, he's also the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead. He is the prototype of resurrection, so that he himself will come to have first place in everything. The ultimate priority is this beloved Son and his Father. Now then, verse 19. This is an interesting verse because the argument Paul is developing here is this, that God, the Father, the invisible God, has a representation that is incarnate in the person of his beloved Son, whose name is Jesus. And Jesus is not lower than this invisible God. He's exactly like this invisible God, which means that he's omnipresent. He's always been, we've gotten that, he's before all things, he's eternal. And now we learn that he is going to attribute to him omnipresence. Verse 19, for it was the Father's good pleasure for all the fullness to dwell in him. And you have to ask the question, what in the world is that fullness? It's a word Paul will use again and again in this letter. It means everything that there is in essence about God the Father, the invisible, is true of God the Son, the visible icon of the invisible God. So do you remember what Thomas asked Jesus in John 14? He said, show us the Father, and that'll satisfy us. And Jesus' reply was, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. But before he says that, he says, how long have I been with you? The point I want you to understand this morning is this. The distinction to remember is this. That when you're talking about the omnipresence of God, you are attributing it not only to the Father who is invisible, you now are attributing it to the Son who was incarnate yet existed eternally. He possesses omnipresence. You also have to apply it to the Spirit of God, because in John 16, Jesus says, I will send another of the same kind as myself, so that he will be with you, and he will guide you into all truth. The distinction to remember, and I'm going to elaborate more on the quote than is on the screen at this point, because I want you to understand the statement that Paul makes to the Colossians in 1:19. He simply says that Jesus Christ fills all in all. In other words, the phrase means there isn't any place you can go anywhere in all of creation made by him, heaven above, earth here, or anything below out of sight, that he has not and has always been there in every place and every time. The distinction is this, and Paul is making this argument in Colossians. The whole Bible makes this argument. The universe is the creation of God. And in particular, Paul says in Colossians 1, it is the creation not only of God the Father, the invisible, the Son is equally involved. In fact, stated by Paul in Colossians that he made it. The Son. The universe is the creation of God, and thus, in respect to essence, no part of him. I'm going to come back to that phrase in a minute. So, although all things are permeated and sustained by God, hence the phrase from Colossians 1:19, that Jesus Christ fills all in all. All things are permeated and sustained by God. God is not all things. Samuel Storms, in his work, The Grandeur of God. You see, in that statement by Samuel Storms, and in what we've read in that brief section in Colossians chapter 1, we have a distinction given to us by God in his word. The distinction is there's a difference between the Creator and everything else. They are not, both in Colossians and in February 26, 2023, the same. They are distinct. They are different. They have been created that way. And they will always be that way. Now, I want to go back to Mr. Storm's statement here and simply come back to this statement that he makes. The universe, the creation of God, is the creation of God. And we've discovered, because we have been given the intelligence that God gave us in creation, we've now come to the point we build these little things and blast them out of our atmosphere into space and send them off with little cameras that transmit pictures back to us. And we're getting pictures back from one of them things out there roaming around. I don't know where it's at. My Garmin won't pick it up. But there it is, out there in space. And we're getting pictures back of places and things we haven't seen before with our eyes. And I listened to a little blip about the scientists who are trying to evaluate these stars and these galaxies and begin to put them into some perspective about our existence here on this little Earth, this little planet that we are on. And I listened to them talk about, and some of the stuff is beyond me. I'm not a scientist. But I listened to them talk about how they would try to relate what we're seeing out there with what we are here. And I thought to myself, I can't miss this opportunity to use this. They are looking at those pictures from a different perspective than I am. I looked at those pictures and I went, wow. And I know who's out there. And this is the first time I get to see what he put out there. And not only is he out there, he's right here. I want to come back to the statement, the universe is the creation of God and thus, in respect to essence, no part of him. The definition of animism, from a philosophical point of view, is this, is that God is everywhere and is everything. So if you want a description of animism, go to Romans chapter 1 and start reading from verse 19 on. You have a description of animism because the creature, instead of worshiping the Creator, now worships the creation. Whether it's a visible thing, a material thing, an idol that you make with your hands, or an invisible thing that you don't know if it's there or not, but you are going to build an altar and you're going to write across that altar an inscription to the unknown, the agnostic theos. Just in case we've missed something, we want to cover our base. And the fundamental error is the error made in the Garden of Eden with Adam and Eve. Because instead of worshiping the Creator, the first idol was themselves. You are surrounded. You are surrounded. And please start looking for it. You are surrounded with the idea that the Creator and the creation are no longer a necessary part of function, but that whatever caused the creation and the creation are the same thing. By definition, that is animism. And you will read it in the Bible from Genesis to Revelation. And it is the obscuring and the denial of an omnipresent God who made everything there is. And the belief that no such thing exists so we can hide. So now I want to take you to Psalm 139. Stephen Charnock, who was a Puritan pastor in England, said this about the omnipresence of God. God is not measured by time. He's eternal. There's never a time when he wasn't. That's hard to explain to someone who wants to know who created God. The answer is, no one created God. He's always been. That's a hard concept to get a little child to understand. I had to do it 3 times in my household. God is not measured by time, so he is not limited by place. Get that? This is a Puritan pastor who lived in the 1600s in England saying, God is not measured by time. How long has God been around? Ever. And yet, so he's not limited by place. If he's always been, then you can't time him. And if he's always been everywhere. You can't put him in a single place and contain him there. Here's what Charnock goes on to say. He's not limited by place. God, because he is infinite, again, this is something you got to wrap your head around if you can, the best you can, but understand this. There's a difference between you and God because he's infinite and you're not. Okay? Because he's infinite, fills all. Fills all. Yet so as not to be contained in them. At one point, this was full of water. Now, you know and I know this doesn't contain all the water there is in the world. Because nobody's got a water bottle that big. Charnock's point is simply this. Because God in his essence is God, he fills everything all the time, at all times, everywhere. He can't be contained. He's not in a tree. He made the tree. He's not in a cow. He made the cow. And yet, he's present everywhere, around, in, and through all these elements, including you and I. The word atom means unsplittable, inseparable. And yet, what do? We have been able to do that. Here's the interesting thing. The Greeks believed that there was a certain element of matter that could not be split in two. And let me tell you something. We've discovered that we can split that baby in two, and I'm going to tell you what. God fills the space in the atom with all of his being at all the time. Here's what Samuel Storms, in the fuller part of his statement that I have up on the screen, said. God is omnipresent according to his operation. That's why Colossians, Paul says, that the creation endures or perseveres or is preserved by God himself. Because he's always operating everywhere. God is omnipresent according to his operation. With his whole being, he is present powerfully here and everywhere with respect to his essence and power. God is as powerful today, February 26, 2023, right here, as he is halfway around the world where earthquakes are occurring. Not part of his power here and part there, all of his power here, all of his power there. He's as much there as he is here. The universe is the creation of God, and thus, in respect to essence, no part of him. Again, Storm says the same thing as Charnock. There's a difference between the Creator and his creation. Do not worship one at the expense of the other. That's man's problem. So, although all things are permeated and sustained by God, Colossians 1:19, God is not all things. Being Holy Spirit, God cannot be divided or separated such that one part of his being is in one place and another part somewhere else. The whole of his being is always everywhere. I tied it to the statement in Jeremiah 23:24 last week. And 23, Jeremiah 23:23 and 24. I tied it to God's omnipresence because Israel had adopted their own warped thinking that they could do whatever they wanted to, and they didn't care if God saw or not. Quite frankly, that is a very old mindset. That is a fallen mindset, because Adam and Eve shared that same mindset. In their arrogance and pride, they rebelled against their Creator, and then they hid. Now, the interesting thing is, if God is omnipresent, where can you hide? You can hide nowhere. Why would you hide? Because you have disobeyed. Do you think God does not know that? No, He knows that very well. Psalm 139. Now then, the final thing. Remember, there's a distinction. Yeah, I'm not going to spend time. Where can I go? Where can I go? Because that's the question David asks in Psalm 139, verse 7. You'll notice the first thing I ask you is David worried or worshiping in Psalm 139? And you can read Psalm 139 on your own. We've talked about it a little bit in omniscience. God's all-knowing in the first 6 verses. But in verse 7, David moves from God's omniscience to God's omnipresence. And he asks the question, where can I go? And there are evenly divided views on this section of Psalm 139. Some view this as David has sinned and he's under the watchful eye of an omnipresent God, and he's confessing his sin. If I read Psalm 139:7 and then I go read Psalm 51, where David is confessing his sin, I get a whole different tone of what's being said. Is David worried because he's been exposed, or is David worshiping God? So I'll just give you a little helpful hint here. Beginning in Psalm 136 and clean through to Psalm 150, the end of the songbook. Those are all psalms, and they are songs, S-O-N-G-S, that were sung from 136 to 150. Songs sung in temple worship. When you know that, you understand you can answer the question. David is not worried here about his sin and failures. David is worshiping his God. And what does he say about his God? You ask yourself that question. What do I think about the God that I say I worship and believe in? Is there any place I can go where he's not there? No. For a rebellious sinner, that's a problem. For a faithful servant of God, that's comfort. So you see, the attributes of God can be a bane or a boon. It can either be good or bad, depending on the question God asked Adam and Eve. Where are you? And he wasn't talking about physical location. He was talking about their heart. Because he knows that. Jeremiah 17:10. So where can I go? Where can I go? So we've answered the question, worried or worshiping. He's worshiping God. And he's talked about, in the preceding 6 verses, his omniscience. Now in verse 7 he goes, where can I go from your spirit? He acknowledges God is invisible. He also acknowledges that God's a spirit. Where can I go? And then he starts in. So you got to answer these questions. If you're a follower of Jesus Christ, if you believe in the God of the Bible, you better start answering these questions. They're going to tip your heart and the condition of it. Where can I go from your spirit? Where can I flee? The word flee means to fly up. If I go out into outer space as far as we've sent the satellite with the camera and getting pictures of things we never seen, if I go there, I'm away from you. You can't see me. Is that true? No. If I fly up into heaven, if I flee from your presence, what a bit of irony. Flee from God's presence? He's everywhere. Can you flee from his presence then? If I fly up into heaven, if I ascend into heaven, you are there. Even with what we know today that they didn't back in that day, light years away. Who's there? because we always want to find out if there is other intelligent life. If I ascend to heaven, you are there. If I make my bed in Sheol, the grave, hell, you are there. If I die, you are there. The thing that humanity fears the most is occupied by God, who sent his exact representation to deliver you from eternal spiritual separation from him. He wants you back. Death does not stop the presence of God, contrary to popular belief. You are there. One of the things in studying the Bible is if you find a repeated phrase, you want to make note of it. Just on your own, 7 through 12, ask the question, how many times is you are there stated? Whether I'm living or dying, I know you're there. You are with me. Where can I go? You can't go anywhere. The psalmist then goes on, if I take the wings of dawn, from sunrise to sunset, if I dwell in the remotest part of the sea, deepest part of the earth is the Mindanao Trench, off the coast of the Philippines, between Philippines and mainland China. You can take and uproot Everest at sea level and take Everest and turn it upside down and drive it into the Mindanao Trench. You'd have a mile of water above you. Mindanao Trench is 39,700 and some feet deep. We don't know what's at the bottom of the Mindanao Trench because nothing we build can sustain the pressure in that water. And it's so dark, light will not penetrate. I don't care where you go on this earth, you can't hide from God. That can be a curse or a blessing. For those who follow Jesus Christ, for the psalmist here in Psalm 139, he says, so no matter what happens to me, nor wherever I go, you are there. You are there. Even there, your hand will lead me. Who's in control of your life? The omnipresent, everywhere God. Your right hand will lay hold of me. The word lay hold literally means to snatch. If I say, surely the darkness will overwhelm me, crush me, and light around me will be night. My life is so dark now, Lord. I've gotten a bad diagnosis from the doctor. My relationships have fallen apart and disintegrated. I've lost a loved one. I'm taking care of somebody who just isn't there mentally anymore. However dark your situation is, folks, understand that the psalmist is saying, for those who are committed wholeheartedly to him, he's there in your darkest of nights. You are never, I will emphasize it, never alone with the God of creation. The darkness is not dark to you. The night is as bright as the day. Darkness and light are alike. You are with me. The omnipresence of God is stated in two places in the New Testament. Hebrews 13:5 and then Matthew 28:20. You remember what Jesus said to his disciples in his final words? And lo, I am with you always. Every place, every time, everywhere, he's there. There's never a time where he does not see. Job said in Job 31:4, he said this, does he not see my ways? You ever ask yourself, does God know what's out in front of me? I do it regularly, from the kitchen to that bedroom. Where am I going? What am I doing? Yeah. You see me. He sees my ways. Listen, Job's admitting that there's nothing you can hide from God, because he's always everywhere all the time and in all places. It is attributed to Yuri Gagarin, the Russian cosmonaut who went into space first. It is attributed to him, there's some dispute as to whether he actually said it or not, but it is attributed to him that when he got back to Earth, he said, I looked out my space capsule window and I looked for God and couldn't find him. It's okay, Yuri. You're up there because he allowed us to figure out manned flight and how to put oxygen and rocket fuel into a canister and send you up there and get you back. But it's okay. You don't have to see him. He's still there. The final thing about where can I go is that I can't go anywhere, but that God is not near me. Philippians chapter 4, verses 5 and 6, Paul is admonishing the Philippian church in the city of Philippi. He's admonishing them that in the midst of adversity because of their faith in Jesus Christ, he's admonishing them not to become discouraged. It's a mental health statement. Be anxious for nothing. I'm not anxious, I just worry. It's the same. Same. Why does he admonish them, be anxious for nothing? Because you're never alone. God's always there. The Lord is always right here, as well as light years away. And he's as much completely here as he is light years away. He's not divided. There isn't a part of him here and a part of him there. No, he's all there and he's all here. All the time. He's near. The Lord is near, Paul says to the Philippian believers. There's never a time. Never a time when he is not immediately there with you. What are you going to do? What are you going to do? The Word of God simply says, both in the book of Joshua and in the book of 1 Corinthians, choose. You're going to have to decide. You're finally going to have to make up your mind. Is God with me when I'm in the middle of a heated argument with my spouse? Absolutely. And by the way, while your temper and your anger have gotten the best of you, who's there watching that? The Holy God. When somebody cuts you off on the road and you let them know about it with your horn, who's there? When you are so discouraged or so hurt, or you've got such bad news from a doctor, an earthquake in Hatay, Turkey, levels an entire town, kills thousands of people. Where's God? He's there. He's there. In the midst of adversity that seems beyond someone's control, we ask the question, where's God? Elie Wiesel, in his book, The Sunflower, gives testimony to an incident that he observed in concentration camps in World War II. There was a hanging taking place in the gallows in the concentration camp he was in. And in their customary fashion, the Germans paraded out prisoners to watch the execution. And he heard some woman from behind him, as they stood there and watched the execution, ask the question, "Where is God? Where is God?" One author, Christian author who uses this illustration, puts it this way. In answer to the woman's question, "Where is God in all this?" this author's answer was, "He's right there. Because he's on the cross, dying for the sin of the executioners." Where's God? He's right there. And he's demonstrated his love to a fallen group of humanity in his Son, who is exactly like him. What are you going to do? You're going to have to choose. The Creator, or what so many people won't choose, the Creator. Let's pray. So, Father, this morning, we will walk out of here to our respective places. You will go with us. You are in no way diminished in your essence or your presence or your power or anything else. You are present everywhere, at all times, in every place, no matter where we go. If we crawl in a capsule and go to the farthest reaches of what our eyes see by technology, you are there. And you permeate every single bit of space there, as you do here. My, what a God you are. And there is no other God like you. So for hearts that are struggling with coming to trust you, I pray by the working of the power in ways that I nor anyone else understands, you would take stone and turn it to clay and make it a heart that trusts you. For those who follow you, my, how many times we shortchange our God and even ask, "Where are you?" And you've been there already. What a God of love, patience, grace, and forgiveness you are. Wherever we go, you are there first. You are never alone. Thank you for your
word. This is my desire, to honor you, Lord, with all my heart. I worship you. All I have within me, I give you praise. All that I adore is in you. Lord, I give you my heart, I give you my soul. I live for you alone. Every breath that I take, every moment I'm away, Lord, have your way in me. This is my desire, to honor you, Lord, with all my heart. I worship you. All I have within me, I give you praise. All that I adore is in you. Lord, I give you my heart, I give you my soul. I live for you alone. Every breath that I take, every moment I'm away. Lord, have your way in me. Lord, I give you my heart, I give you my soul. I live for you alone. Every breath that I take, every moment I'm away. Lord, have your way in me. Lord, I give you my heart, I give you my soul. I live for you alone. Every breath that I take, every moment I'm away. Lord, have your way in me. Amen. Have a great week. You're dismissed.